Sri Aurobindo is leading us to understand what the Kena Upanishad means when it uses the phrase sense of our sense, that the Brahman is the sense of our senses, the true seeing behind our seeing, the true hearing behind our hearing, and so on. So in the discussion so far, we have seen that finally it is mind which sees, which knows by contact with things. But when mind sees things purely, at a distance, for example, in parapsychological phenomena, it is not looking through biological organs. It is pure mind consciousness meeting things, and yet it sees, smells, tastes, touches, and so on. So the discussion now moves to what is it in mind or in consciousness that gives rise to this fivefold perception of senses. There must be something inherent in consciousness perceiving that has a fivefold character. And Sri Aurobindo has taken the discussion now to a depth which is not common to our thinking. We are asked to look beyond the appearances to the deeper process involved in all sense perception. And although we have touched this last time, it is worth repeating because we have to train our mind to begin to see things more directly, more deeply. It is easy enough to say that this here is a flower, that light bounces from its surface and creates in our eye or eventually in our mind the sense of a shape of the flower. Or when my finger touches it, it experiences a pressure, a contact, and by that contact, even if I don't look, I can feel the shape and form of the flower. Or I can smell it, or taste it, or even hear it if the wind blows through it. But what is actually happening when these senses are operating? What is happening at the point of contact which gives rise to the sense of touch or the color and so on? And this is where Sri Aurobindo aligns the investigation with the discoveries of modern science and inquiry of knowledge. He says more and more we come to the conclusion that not only properties of form are operations of force, but form itself is an operation of force. So color, light, yes, of course these are operations of force. Science tells us they are a frequency of vibration, of energy. But the form itself, behind those operations of light or sound reaching us, the form itself is an operation of force. And here he draws on the authority of the Upanishad, Shvetashvatara Upanishad, which says, Devatma Shakti Swagunair Nigudham, translated by Sri Aurobindo as self-power of divine existent hidden by its own modes. And this idea we need to imprint more deeply. There is here, behind, essentially in the flower, the divine existent, because there is nothing other than the divine. Nothing exists other than the divine. So the flower itself, in essence, is the divine existent. But what is that divine existent doing? It is in state of energy. The energy itself is in movement. And the movement of that energy puts out to our contact a certain response. In other words, when my finger approaches and enters close enough to enter in touch with the energy moving there, the energy puts forward a response, either a hard push or a soft, absorbing, pushing back, absorbing, pushing back, or scraping movement, or any of the innumerable variations possible of how that energy responds to my finger reaching out to touch it. That response essentially defines to my finger the sense of contact. When the pushback is hard, as in the stem, I say, oh, this is hard. When the pushback is soft and it is compressible, I push and it withdraws but exerts a gentle resistance, I say, this is soft, it is velvety. The same thing happens with light. The light that reflects from it reflects or gets modified in reflection depending on what kind of response this divine consciousness is energetically putting out to the push of the light ray. So let's say a light ray vibrating, particulate or vibration, reaches, and as it approaches, it experiences a reaction, a response from this energy in movement. If that response is simply to absorb the light ray and vibrate with it and absorb the energy, then we will see it as black. In other words, no light reflecting from it. If that response of the energy is to meet the light vibrating, vibrate itself but in a different way, stimulated by the light but its own vibration being different, there is the radiation of a light from this substance of a different color. So the light coming upon it is yellow, but what radiates is reddish. So I say, this is a red flower. If the response is matching perfectly in the vibration of the light and radiates exactly the same response, then I say, this is reflective. The light has bounced from it and given me a reflection. The whole appearance that I have through my sight of this form is determined entirely by how that energy vibrates. So let's reread Sri Aurobindo's line here from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Self-power of the divine existent hidden by its own modes. Devatma Shakti Swagunair Nigudham. Nigudham is covered up, and Nigudham deeply covered up. The self-power, Deva Atma Shakti, divine self-energy, is covered up, Nigudham, by what? Swagunair, by its self-qualities. In other words, the consciousness of the divine presence here conceals itself by the qualities that it puts out. We meet only those qualities on the surface which create for us the sense of the form. But what is behind, what is real, is only the power, the energy, the consciousness of the divine. In the qualities it puts out, the guna determines our sense of its appearance, our sense of its form, color, taste, smell, touch, etc. Guna also suggests something very important here. We have essentially, you can say, innumerable qualities, but all qualities boil down to three essential qualities. Remember? Tamas, Rajas and Sattva. Now you will see the force within this flower consciousness. As it meets my force of touch or light or whatever, it can respond to that only in three ways. Resisting, blocking, or actively engaging, or taking in and creating some kind of balanced response. Tamas, Rajas and Sattva. All colors, all sensations, all appearances boil down to combinations and variations of these three modes. So our ancient rishis, by a very long process of introspection, and Sri Aurobindo says it was a very long process of introspection, came to the conclusion that all activities of energy, all modes of energy, all qualities which we experience in the world are essentially the outcome of combinations of these three gunas, three three qualities: resistance, kinetic response, and balanced response. Inertia, energetic push, and harmonization. There are no other. All are essentially a product of combinations of these three. Now you could put it this way: at the atomic level, and before even there is an atom, there is pure energy of consciousness, of the self, of the divine. It puts its energy out in certain ways, responds in certain ways to external impacts of energy, and the patterns of its responses in combination of these three gunas creates the appearance for us of the form: color, smell, taste, touch, etc. Now look at it the other way. My finger approaching is doing what? My finger itself, remember, is no different from the flower. It is divine consciousness taking on a certain response of energy which creates a sense of form, texture, taste, smell, touch of the finger. So it is divine consciousness in energetic pattern of gunas, qualities, approaching the flower, which is divine consciousness putting out an energetic pattern of qualities. Qualities meeting qualities, modifying each other, which creates the sense of taste, touch, smell, etc. So Sri Aurobindo is now taking us to a very deep level where we have to look at things in terms of the essential consciousness and its energetic response of qualities. So we read Sri Aurobindo's text here, portion we had read last time. Practically, therefore, all form is only an operation of consciousness, impressing itself with presentations of its own working. Therefore comes from the earlier sentence, this force proves to be self-power of conscious being in a state of energy and activity. So, when we meet an object, all form is an operation of consciousness impressing itself with presentations of its own workings. My consciousness meets consciousness, which is also my consciousness, impressing itself with presentations of its own working, the way this consciousness is working. He gives examples. We see color because that is the presentation which consciousness makes to itself of one of its operations, the way it responds to the light wave. But color is only an operation of force, working in the form of light. And light again is only a movement, that is to say, an operation of force. So the color is an operation of force, light is an operation of force, everything is an operation of force. The question is, what is essential to this operation of force, taking on itself the presentation of form? For it is this that must determine the working of sanjnana or sense on whatever plane it may operate. So when consciousness is meeting in consciousness in operations of force, what is there happening in essence there? This is so important because what is happening in essence of consciousness meeting consciousness is happening not only in the physical world, it's happening on all planes of existence, all the way to the highest, purest, essential consciousness. In other words, in our investigation now of the nature of sense perception, we have gone to the core of what is happening at the level of pure consciousness meeting consciousness. And this principle is across all creation, across all levels, everywhere. If this we can understand, we have the clue to understanding perception and the 5 ways of perceiving in all planes of existence. In fact, as we will see later, the explanation as it unfolds will give us a glimpse and understanding of how things appear in the subtle worlds. In what way they're similar, in what way they're different to the physical world, because the principle is operating the same everywhere. So now we need to see what's happening when consciousness turns to look at consciousness. Everything begins with vibration or movement, the original kshobha or disturbance. If there is no movement of the conscious being, it can only know its own pure static existence. Without vibration or movement of being in consciousness, there can be no act of knowledge and therefore no sense. We read this text last time, but we have to imprint it more deeply and we will view it now differently. So let's say I am conscious, I am aware, simply. I sit passive like a stone, just this awareness. But at some point my awareness says, oh, but is my awareness fully awake or is it sleeping like the stone? And at that point my awareness turns to see, am I sleeping? Am I awake? In other words, the consciousness turns to become aware of itself. That first movement of turning to become conscious is that disturbance, that agitation, that movement. If there was not this movement, there would be only static existence. There will not be knowledge. Knowledge happens because I turn to become conscious of myself. Am I conscious or am I sleeping? So simple question could be asked. Do you exist? Immediately your attention turns. Yes, I am aware, I exist. But if I was not turned like this and somebody asks, do you exist? I don't know, what's the answer I should give? So I ask, well, what do you feel? Then I turn attention on myself. What do I feel? So this movement of consciousness turning upon itself to become conscious. Nothing has moved. We have to use the word movement only because there is no other vocabulary to use. I am aware. My awareness becomes aware that I am conscious. Nothing has moved. But consciousness has entered in relation with itself. No physical movement. That's why in the yogic tradition, this movement or vibration is called kshobha, disturbance, agitation. Something which breaks the stillness and the static condition. And unless there is this, he says, there can be no act of knowledge and therefore no sense. Now notice, the moment you say, I am conscious, you turn to become conscious, there's already a sense. You perceive your consciousness. Although the two are same, but you perceive your consciousness as if another object. If you notice the character of that perception, you will find in it vaguely all five senses. I feel my consciousness is right now bright, clear, fresh, or I feel it is dull, tired, sleepy. There is a character of quality that you feel. It may even have a form. I feel my consciousness radiating brightly. I feel it withdrawing as if trying to gather into a center. There's already a sense of form taking place. My consciousness feels somewhat heavy, dull, touch, sensation. Even you will use the vocabulary, I feel bright, chirpy. Where is the chirpy coming? It's a sound sensation. But when you actually try to analyze these terms, of course you can't reduce it to a sound or a form because it's pure consciousness. And yet it has that character. If it had a form distinctly, then we would have no problem. But even without form, it has this fivefold sensory character. Consciousness meeting consciousness. Okay? So he says, movement of conscious being as knowledge, becoming sensible of itself as movement of force. In other words, the knowledge separating itself from its own working to watch that and take it into itself by feeling. That is the basis of universal samjnana, that is sense perception. So it sounds technical, but the idea is very simple. The awareness turns, becomes aware of its own character, and then takes into itself, what does it feel like? My awareness feels, it feels bright, it feels dull, it feels whatever. There's a taking in of what it feels, an identification taking place. So first a separation to look at itself, and then a connecting, a touching, a drawing in to take into itself to perceive. Now this is what is happening internally in pure consciousness meeting consciousness. But this is equally true when we are turning outwards. After all, what is this flower? The same one divine consciousness in essence putting out an energetic play. What is this person who wants to know? The same divine consciousness putting out an energetic play. What's the finger through which he is reaching out? The same divine consciousness in energetic play. So whether through sight or through touch, it is consciousness first turning to separate and then entering in a relation to take in. It smells good, it tastes good, it looks good, it sounds good, as it takes in. And this is the essence of samjnana, the essential universal sense of consciousness. And Sri Aurobindo gives a few examples. This is true both of our internal and external operations. So we know ourselves internally, my mood, my state, or I look at an object, but it's the same operation. I become anger by a vibration of conscious force acting as nervous emotion. And I feel the anger that I have become by another movement of conscious force acting as light of knowledge. So what is anger? If you observe yourself and say, I am angry, what is it that you call anger? It's a vibration of conscious force in your nerves and emotions. Suddenly there's an agitation, a pushing, an edging, a nudging. Now the same thing could be a push of an inspired action. What distinguishes anger from the inspired action? The way it responds to the external contact. So when I have an inspired action, somebody comes and says, how are you? I say, oh, I'm fine. When I'm in the state of agitation, someone says, how are you? Don't disturb me. The difference was the form in which the response came. And that person says, oh, you look irritated, you seem upset about something. Or when I say, I'm fine, and I continue, then he says, oh, you look very calm, you look very happy. The nature of the disturbance, the pattern of the disturbance is the sense of the anger. How do I know I'm angry? My own consciousness now, as if separates, turns upon that pattern and observes it, as if somebody else. But whether it's somebody else observing or my own consciousness observing, he says it's the same thing. It's conscious being, conscious force, acting as light of knowledge, observing, to know. The same thing is happening, forget the emotions, just awareness of body. I am conscious of my body because I have myself become the body. Do you know you have a body? Not in your memory. Observe now. How do you know you have a body? My consciousness turns, observes, feels sensation of the body. Although it is identified with the sensation, there's a part of my mind separating, observing. That same force of conscious being which has made this form of itself, this presentation of its workings, knows it in that form, in that presentation. In other words, this body form, remember, is divine consciousness putting out a pattern of energy quality. That same consciousness turns and recognizes its own pattern of energy quality. That is all there is in all perception in all the universe. There is no other perception. I can know nothing except what I myself am. You see how the logic has brought us step by step to this deep recognition. You know your body form because your own consciousness has put out that form, and you know yourself in the way you have chosen to present yourself. That's all that is happening. I can know nothing except what I myself am. If I know others, the flower, it is because they also are myself. Because myself has assumed these apparently alien presentations, as well as that which is nearest to my own mental center. So the truth is this: there is one consciousness. It has taken the flower form, it has taken my body form and my eye form and my mind form, which now looks, and because it is the same consciousness meeting itself, knowing how it represented itself to itself, therefore I see flower. Only to this mind part of the consciousness, that looks far, my forehead feels near, my thoughts feel intimate. So when I say my thinking is clouded, that is the most intimate part of the contact of my consciousness meeting itself. The flower seems farther, and so there is a sense of otherness. But the truth is, it is one consciousness representing itself in the whole universe to itself, and it sees itself and knows how it has chosen to represent itself. You remember we discussed this last time briefly, why we all experience the same color. If I say this is mauve, violet, red, whatever the precise shade of color would be, everybody sees the same, although all of us have different wirings of the eyes, of the brain, and completely different. Yet we all see the same color, because the one who sees color experience is the mind. And our mind being one in universal mind. It is universal mind which sees this as red. It is universal mind which has represented itself to itself as flowerness. My mind is only a ripple in the universal mind. My sight is a small patch in the universal sight. Therefore, all of us see the same color, because universal mind sees through my mind, through your mind, through the bee's mind, and we all see the same. So here Sri Aurobindo takes it to its logical conclusion. All sensation, all action of sense is thus the same in essence, whether external or internal, physical or psychical. Now here's an extraordinary statement. Whether you're looking at a physical object or an object of the mind, a thought, an emotion, or things of the subtle worlds, or things of the essential consciousness of self, it is all the same operation. All sensation, which is seeing, and all action of the sense, which is action, is the same in essence. Whether physical or psychical, whether external or internal. What's happening inside me? I feel my stomach queasy. I feel my thought disturbed. But if I look at your thought and your stomach, it's the same operation taking place. Now I say this is an extraordinary statement in its implications, because it means there is no reason why I cannot see your thought as intimately as I see my thought. That I cannot feel your stomach as intimately as I feel my stomach. There's no reason stopping me. Except habit. Habit of our evolution and our fixation of consciousness on the physical senses, through which alone we seem to be able to see. Because my stomach makes strong growling sound, I hear it, I feel it, because I put my attention to it through my physical wiring of nerves. But the pure mind can see it as directly in my stomach as in your stomach. The same way in which I am aware of my thoughts makes possible the same mechanism, the same effort to sense another's thoughts, or to sense the movement of thoughts in the universe as they move in waves across, exciting people, awakening in people emotions or thoughts. The same power of consciousness is already in us. The only difference is we have habituated ourselves to see as if with blinkers. We have put on ourselves self-imposed blinkers. And if once in a while the blinker slips and we sense or see something more, we dismiss it, must be my imagination. It's a very interesting phenomenon that takes place when people claim to have what we call psychic powers. Somebody is clairvoyant, or he is able to act on things at a distance. If there is somebody in the group who has a very strong denial of such phenomena, a refusal to accept, then the person who has the capacity feels as if blocked. And it is a known thing. When people who disbelieve go away, suddenly the phenomena appear again more easily. When they are there, it seems as if things get blocked. Why? Because they bring in their mind a fixed form of belief which imprints on the group. Even as somebody with conviction imprints his conviction on the group, and there's a mix which is stronger, that tends to dominate. Of course, they interfere with each other. And so when somebody comes and says, I will prove to you that these phenomena are not true, and he comes with a very strong power of conviction and an energy which as if comes to suppress, it's as if he brings blinkers and blocks. But if the same person were to relax and say, yes, I'm open and I accept, the blinkers open with the equal force and things can open easily. And so we recognize how our own belief or habit, being the right word, our habit of perception or refusal to perceive puts limitations on our own consciousness. This is the reason why when people begin to perceive at first, and one can train oneself to sense things and see, beginning with just the sense of the aura around, as one begins to sense, the ability grows. As one pays attention, it grows more, and so on. But essentially, within us is already the capacity to see, feel, taste, touch, smell everything that is in the whole universe as easily as we do that within ourselves or in things immediately around us. Because that is the essential power of consciousness. All sensation and all action of sense. If I can push with my finger, I can push with my mind, it's the same phenomenon essentially. All sensation, all action of sense is thus the same in essence, whether external or internal, physical or psychical. That essential being the same, the variations come only because of fixation of particularities in form and instruments. Now this being recognized, we see immediately why there must be 5 types of perception, 5 senses. And this he now explains in the next paragraph. We are through the most difficult part. If we have got through this much, the rest now becomes very easy. But this vibration of conscious being is presented to itself by various forms of sense, which answer to the successive operations of movement in its assumption of form. So let's say this flower is truly, essentially, divine consciousness as energy and response of energy in their qualities concealing by creating the sense of form. Okay? This is what it is. I am holding divine consciousness in a particular rhythm of energetic expression. But the way the energetic expression rhythms out and reveals itself has several grades of operation. Each of those grades of operation my pure consciousness can perceive. And if there are 5 of them, then I have the sense of 5 perceptions, 5 gradations of perceptions. And so he now describes what are those successive operations of movements by which it assumes form. I'll step back briefly before continuing with the text. Let's go back to the first original question. If all things in the world are one indivisible essential self, how does something indivisible ever appear as so many different forms and objects? So many different petals, so many different colors, so many different everything. If it is indivisible to begin with, it cannot break up. If it could break up, then it was not indivisible to begin with. It was made of pieces. And here comes the insight by deep introspection. One consciousness indivisible, let's say the ocean, goes through a series of self-modifications. First change, which is pushed by its own force. Second change, pushed by its own force. Third change, pushed by its own force. Here form appears, but unstable forms. Fourth change, and then fifth change makes for stable, static, sustained form appearance. There are 4 layerings of force by which it modifies itself. All are 5 layers of force modifying itself, all coming from the pure consciousness energizing itself in 5 ways, 5 steps, 5 layers. Each of them, because it is an action of force, draws a response to my consciousness, which is seeing, trying to know. And so there are 5 particular ways in which I can know this thing simultaneously. 5 senses, therefore. But they are all essentially energetic pushes of the consciousness in steps to create form. So let's see what those 5 are, and then we will answer this question more explicitly. How many forms appear out of something which is indivisible? Sri Aurobindo writes it thus. For first, we have intensity of vibration, creating regular rhythm, which is the basis or constituent of all creative formations. So the first thing this one consciousness does, intensity of vibration, disturbance. I want to know, I want to be aware. And there's a vibration in the consciousness, undivided still. Secondly, contact or intermittence of the movements of conscious being which constitute the rhythm. So when I am oscillating, I am moving, I want to know, I want to become aware, and there's this ripple of movement. Remember, there's no space, no time, no form. It is pure consciousness. It moves this way, it moves this way, it moves this way. Every possible vibration that it could move in is simultaneously present. And these vibrations interact, they join, they mix. Use this word, contact or intermittence of the movement of conscious being which constitute the rhythm. So you take a string, shake it, pluck it, it vibrates. You will notice there's one vibration which spans the entire string. And then there are smaller vibrations which move across. And they are all simultaneous. They're all mixing into each other. In the big vibration, there are smaller vibrations. They're mixing, joining, as if touching. So first there's vibration at the first level. Second level, there are vibrations touching, joining, mixing, merging, forming combinations. And this is where we have the sense of contact. And thirdly, definition of the grouping of movements which are in contact, their shape. So let's say these groups join and they keep joining, and it's as if they form a group which is moving like this, one big oscillation, giving you the sense of shape. If you have seen ever in laboratories, they show this nowadays also on television, when they show you sound vibrations, they'll show you a pattern like that. If you notice, there's a frequency, but the frequency itself has a shape, and the shape is called a waveform. I'm just turn to mathematics briefly for those who are inclined to that. You can take any waveform. It is the waveform which creates the distinctive nature of sound. Someone blows a trumpet, someone blows a flute. Same pitch. So frequency is same. But the waveform of the trumpet and the waveform of the flute are what make it different as sound. I could take the waveform, any waveform, and mathematically we can break it down into combinations of many frequencies. That's called a Fourier transform, Fourier analysis. Any shape you draw of a waveform can be broken up into series of plain, simple frequencies all added up together. Any waveform, and this is mathematically provable. However complex shape you make, however complex the nature of the sound, it boils down to a series of frequencies of pure sound, combined. And when they are combined and merged, they create this combined waveform, as if the sense of a shape. So thirdly, definition of the grouping of movements which are in contact, their shape. Now you can see how in one consciousness, one ocean which is moving, undivided, there is now already the emergence of something like a shape. But the shapes are not stable. They can fall back like sound. They can fall back into silence. Or shapes pass through each other. They don't bounce. They are not hard. They are not rigid. Like waves passing through each other. Like a ghost walking through a wall. They do not have concreteness in relation to each other. So comes a fourth stage of force modifying. Fourthly, the constant welling up of the essential force to support in its continuity the movement that has thus been defined. The trumpet blower blows, boom, but it stopped. He has to keep blowing, boom. There's something which has to keep pushing to maintain that welling up of the form, otherwise the form will lapse. If you have many ripples coming together, you see this sometimes if you watch the ocean. You see one wave and another wave, they suddenly join and there's a burst of a wave rising and it falls, nothing. Unless the force which brings it up sustains, pushes continuously, it will not stay up as a wave. The same thing if you watch a river. A river is flowing, it should normally flow flat, except you notice some places it rises in an upwelling form and the form remains constant. If you look carefully, below is a stone. As the river moves, the stone pushes up the water and just above the stone there is a welling up and then it falls back. But the welling up remains constant because the stone and the pressure of the water keeps a constant upward push. And you have a welling up and sometimes there's a down, as if the flat river gets a hole, because there's a hole below, it pulls the water down and it creates on the surface this form. Unless there is a force sustaining, it would not continue. So, fourthly, the constant welling up of the essential force to support in its continuity the movement that has thus been defined. It keeps it continuous. Now suddenly the forms stay stable, they don't just collapse. Fifth, and this completes the process. Fifthly, the actual enforcement and compression of the force in its own movement which maintains the form that has been assumed. Now here comes another impulse inside which enforces and holds against pressure to break. Now suddenly this being meeting another being, they don't pass right through, they bang, because this is resisting the breakup of its form. That is the resisting the breakup of its form. So my two hands, they hit each other. Remove the fifth layer and my two hands would pass through each other. Remove the fourth layer and my hands would be undefined, unstable in form. They would not last as a shape. Remove that third layer and you would not have form, you would have only vibrations, qualities of energy moving around. Remove that second layer and you have only combinations, vibrations in one fundamental ocean. In other words, essentially it is still one indivisible self. But through 5 layers of push of its energy, force and quality which the energy expresses, it builds the appearance of waves, stable forms, sustained forms, which now seem to be distinct because they bang into each other, they interact with each other. So this is a very profound insight, and it's a very useful exercise to sit before the ocean and dwell on this idea that it is one ocean. All the waves are transitional forms. There are these modifications which create stable forms, sustaining forms, when a wave repeats again and again, creating a particular form, shape. And this is exactly what happens when you look at things, when you look at the flower. Where did the flower come from? In pure self, there was first the kshobha, the disturbance, the vibration, consciousness wanting to know itself as flower. And then the series of vibrations of qualities that it threw up in vibrations created the sense of contact, coagulating as if, until in the third force, they acquire a grouping of movement. In the fourth, there is a push inside, filling the grouping, giving it a particular quality, which is the vibrational quality of this flower, which I smell. And in the fifth, the enforcement of compression, holding it together against my finger, which creates the sense of a stable, rigid, fixed object. Now these 5 layers you will find correspond to the 5 senses, and this is what Sri Aurobindo will show us shortly. In matter, these 5 constituent operations are said by the Sankhyas to represent themselves as 5 elemental conditions of substance: the etheric, atmospheric, igneous, liquid, solid. We've all heard these things spoken very loosely, that everything is made up of ether, air, fire, water, earth. Combination of these things make all material. Pancha Mahabhuta, we say in English. 5 great elemental conditions. But to modern science, this looks weird. No, that's not true. Everything is made of molecules and atoms and essentially subatomic particles and pure energy. What is this 5 elements mixing? It is silly. But you see, what science is doing is looking at a very superficial layer of reality, how things are formed on a material level and superficially. The first cause of why an atom appears, the first cause of why a particle appears, has not been addressed by science. The Vedantic perspective, here particularly the Sankhya system, addresses this question. And that's where we see these 5 elemental conditions of consciousness force modifying itself. And the completion of the 5 leads to the stable form. Now comes the interesting idea. In the subtle worlds, these 5 conditions can be experienced separately, but in the physical world they are always mixed. But because they exist in the physical domain, we have 5 states of matter. Where one condition predominates, it creates a state. Where another condition predominates, it creates another state. So you take ice, what is it? It is the same thing as water, which is the same thing as steam, and yet they are different in quality, they are different in property. Molecularly they are exactly the same, atomically they are exactly the same. Science does not explain what makes for ice to be different from water or steam, except to say molecules are more tightly packed. But if it's only a question of tight packing, then water by itself should break down if you just allow it to spread. What keeps it together? Ice itself should become liquid if you just allow it. What keeps it ice? In fact, temperature is only the state representing itself to you. Temperature has no reality of its own. So what makes for the ice, water, air? From the Sankhya perspective, we will say, when the 5th element, earth element, solid element, is strong, it holds together with this quality of enforcement and compression of the force in its own movement. When that element is withdrawn, the enforcement of form breaks down and the previous condition becomes more obvious, which is the constant welling up of the essential force to support continuity of movement. And now you have stable substance, but it's flowing, fluid with the force. Only the quality of wateriness, its essential liquid quality, is there. When that itself welling force weakens and the containment in the quality fades out, it becomes gas. It spreads out. You do not have anymore the wateriness. It's there in the humidity, the water is there, but I do not feel it as water anymore. When the quality of wateriness reinforces itself, the humidity becomes liquid water. When the character of solidity, the energy which makes solid, the impulse comes forward, it becomes ice, fixed shape. Now, these 5 elemental conditions of substance are now called etheric, atmospheric, igneous, liquid, solid. That is ether, air, fire, water, earth. Sri Aurobindo uses words very skillfully, very precisely. And so it's always a joy to analyze why he uses a particular word. And remember, he is a master of Greek and Latin, both ancient Greek, ancient Latin. He wrote poetry at the age of 12 in ancient Greek. That's the kind of mastery he had. So when he writes in English, and most English words are coming from Greek and Latin roots, he always has behind the original sense of the roots behind. And of course, being by this time when he wrote these, he was a master of Sanskrit, Bengali, Hindi, Tamil. He knew a bit of Russian, he knew French very well. He wrote poetry in French of a very high order, spiritual poetry. And several other languages, including, it appears, a little bit of Arabic. He had intended to also show root connections with Arabic. With that kind of mastery, you should always be careful of his choice of words and look deeper. So here he uses etheric, atmospheric. He uses igneous instead of fire. Fire is the common term, we say fire element. He says igneous. If you look at the root is in Latin, which is igne, which is known to be originating prior to Latin, in Old Latin, in what they call Proto-Indo-European language, is Agni. The same root as Sanskrit Agni, fire. So igneous derives from Agni, and this is a known thing. It's not, you'll find it declared in English dictionaries. So, and this is the original sense of Agni. You will see in the Veda, Agni is that impulse which is the creator of form. And its operation in creating form, it is also triple. 3 ways in which it creates form. But for the moment, we don't look at that. But this particular impulse that comes out from the original consciousness of self, which gives fixity of the form, is the Agni force. And therefore, it is fire principle. And liquid similarly corresponds to the Vedic deities and so on. But we will perhaps explore that on another occasion. Right now we stay with the text. In matter we see these 5 elemental conditions. All matter can be seen in a physical level, in a solid level, liquid level, fiery level, gaseous level, and something beyond gas, for which the vocabulary did not exist when this text was written, which much later, almost 50 years later, has been described as plasma, where the electrons are stripped out. Goes to some kind of an essential level. So the exact distinctions and correspondences with the physical gradations are not so important, but we notice that there are these states corresponding to whether that particular power of consciousness is stronger or not. And from this, it is easy to understand why the ancients said all matter is made from the combination of 5 elements, 5 elemental energetic impulses coming from self. Now he makes the correspondences with the 5 senses. And the rhythm of vibration is seen by them. So he's giving the authority to the Sankhyas. The rhythm of vibration is seen by them as Shabda, sound, the basis of hearing. So that first vibration in self, creating one gradation of perception, corresponds to the sound. The intermittence as contact, the basis of touch. So when combinations of waves join, merge, enter in contact, create patterns of interference, that is the basis of the touch experience. The definition as shape, the basis of sight. So it is only when the shape character emerges, where you have the grouping of movement, that light can begin to reflect. Before that, you will touch something, like you can touch air, but you don't have form. But when that grouping forms, light reflects, then you say, there is a form. So there's a cloud. It's still made of water vapor. But now it reflects light because the grouping has become more stable. The same water vapor disperses, you do not see cloud. But the same water vapor is there. But you don't have sight. The upflow of force as rasa, sap, the basis of taste. So when you taste the air, it's because of this rasa, the sap which you're touching. You're tasting fruit. It's the sap essential behind which you're tasting. We'll come to these in further examples shortly. And the discharge of the atomic compression as gandha, odor, the basis of smell. When there is this compression to hold, there is with it a kind of a discharge, a rippling out of that force of compression that comes to us as smell. So now you can see why, because of 5 functions of force of consciousness, each adding to the experience of perception, because it provides a different kind of relation to the perceiving consciousness. We have 5 elemental conditions of matter and 5 senses, distinct ways of seeing the same thing. But in essence, we will say they're all united in one perception. It is true that this is only predicated of pure or subtle matter. The physical matter of our world being a mixed operation of force, these 5 elemental states are not found there separately except in a very modified form. So in the subtle worlds, each of these 5 conditions can be experienced separately. In the physical world, because all these forces are mixed, it's difficult to distinguish them, to separate them. And so we see all 5 together with one predominating, like the example we took of ice, water and vapor. Now, the actual correspondence, I will have to make a correction. The ice corresponding to solid, water corresponding to liquid, vapor corresponding to the fire principle, the plasma corresponding to the air principle, and there is an etheric condition which of course current science does not yet know. You see a continuity in these steps where these qualities dominate. In the physical world, it's mixed. In the subtle world though, the experience can be very distinct. You can experience a kind of an underlying vibration of the atmosphere, which when you listen carefully, it's like you're listening to silence, but there's a quality to the silence. There's a vibration to the silence. It is this which in the ancient tradition is called pranava, the original creative vibration underlying all cosmos. And when you listen to it, after a while you begin to feel it as a presence and can even enter into a perception of the self. There is equally in the subtle world the sense of contact. I feel the presence impacting upon me, no form, nothing. And this is something we can feel with our subtle senses. When you walk into a space, oh, the presence here is very powerful. What are you feeling? As if a pressure of the presence. Where? What? It's not a physical touch. It's a pressure on your consciousness. You approach the ashram main building. If you cross the canal, go about 200 meters, 300 meters away, and as you approach the main building, you will as if feel you're crossing into denser and denser layers of the atmosphere. And at some point, as you enter the main building, you cross the threshold of the door, suddenly it is dense. And even there you can feel denser as you approach the samadhi. It's as if the focal point, the center of that densest vibration. But there's no form. At the 3rd level, you begin to perceive. The mother describes how, when she first was approaching Pondicherry, the first time she came by train, the second time by ship. And she says from the ship, as she looked towards Pondicherry, she could see this massive column of white light where Sri Aurobindo's consciousness was present. A perception of the sight, where a definition, a shape, a form of that presence is given. And then as you come closer, again, this sight is not a physical sight, it's a subtle sight. You enter the space and it feels so brightly lit up. Your mood today is so bright, and because there is a light in the aura, a brightness in the aura, perceived on a subtle level. And then, as you approach, there is the sense of taste. This is a less common perhaps perception, but when you meet somebody you have a sense of vibrational quality which often you will translate in words and say, oh, this person is so bitter, this person is so sweet. What are you tasting when you say sweet? In their vibration of consciousness as they interact with you, you feel a sweetness. It's not a taste on your tongue, it's when your consciousness, your aura meets their aura, and something of their consciousness enters your consciousness. Oh, there's a sweetness to it, a kind of a harmony, an alignment. And the last is the smell. And it is this which is the most concrete part of it. If you are careful, you will find you can as if smell a person's consciousness, a person's aura. Sometimes there's as if a perfume in their presence. Sometimes in someone else's presence you might feel as if some kind of a distasteful smell. And they represent, or they are the most material representation of the vibrational quality of their consciousness. Now in the subtle world, in the subtle body, these things are concretely felt. You smell at a great distance. Mother describes how one morning she got up and there was this horrible smell in the whole atmosphere. Now she's not talking of the physical smell. And then she went to investigate the whole atmosphere, meaning huge space. She discovered the Chinese had exploded an atom bomb very close to the India border. And the stench of that had spread in the subtle world. Now physically we see this huge explosion and there's a distance various 30-40 kilometers or so. But in the subtle world, the atomic explosion has a massive impact which spreads a huge distance, not only through the whole earth, but even beyond into outer space, affecting everything. And Mother said it took her 2 hours to gather all that stench and deal with it and dissolve it. Imagine on a human level, scientists are celebrating, oh, we blew up this atom bomb, totally unconscious of its consequences on the subtler levels. And on those subtle levels, these divine beings have to struggle to protect humanity from their own stupidity by containing the damage that is taking place on those levels. But on the subtle world, very often at a great distance, one feels the smell first. But it's as concrete as the touch in the physical world. It hits you. The impact is very strong. And the same with taste and so on. Even with form. When the form has not been concretized, it passes through each other. In the subtle world, this is normal. You could take 2 flowers and they would pass right through each other. If necessary, they may choose to enter in relation where they enter in contact. This is the reason why things of the subtle world right now are passing right through us. We are not conscious of them, they are not conscious of us. In the subtle world, 2 people can be sitting next to each other, or let's say physically we are 2 people sitting next to each other. Our subtle auras do not bump into each other. They just pass through, one not touching the other even as they pass through. But when in my consciousness I am sitting next to somebody, in my consciousness I turn with interest and choose to feel their consciousness, then it's as if I highlight that particular quality of contact and suddenly I feel their aura. Now sometimes this can happen unconsciously or consciously, but there is as a result a kind of contact. If the contact is distasteful, we sit apart, we separate each other. So often it happens unconsciously when you are in a crowded space, you're sitting in the park on a bench, somebody comes and sits and you move aside slightly because something doesn't feel quite comfortable, things like that. These are all things happening at subtle levels, but in the subtle body, it's much more intense. So, it is true, this description of the 5 senses in their pure form, it is true that this is only predicated of pure or subtle matter. The physical matter of our world being a mixed operation of force, these 5 elemental states are not found there separately, except in a very modified form. So there can be in the subtle world separate experiences of the 5 elemental states. Experiences only where you have the domain of the contact of smell, contact of taste, contact of form, sight, contact of touch or of sound, but completely separate. essentially all formation, anything taking on a form, all formation, to the most subtle and most beyond our senses, such as form of mind, form of character, form of soul, amount, when scrutinized, to this fivefold operation of conscious force in movement. Anywhere there is a form, it is this fivefold operation of conscious force in movement. So, in the physical obviously, but even to the most subtle and beyond our senses. Our senses don't see form of mind, form of thought. But even there, it is this fivefold operation which creates form of thought. Same as form of character. When you meet somebody, you say, oh, he has such a well-developed character. You're sensing something. That thing exists, in fact, as a form. In the subtle world, distinctly seen and felt. But it is formed by these five operations of conscious force. Form of soul. How can soul have form? When self enters the domain of space-time. You see, self is beyond space-time, unchanging therefore. But it also manifests in space-time and as space-time, and puts a part of itself to enter the experience of space-time. We call that soul, individualized soul. And at that point, it is in the domain of space-time and can be perceived in form. So when you enter in relation with the soul or the psychic being, the true soul, or even a superficial reflection of the soul, one can meet it in form and experience its qualities. And there also there is a fivefold operation. Everywhere, all formation involves this fivefold operation of conscious force in movement. So what would be the form of the soul? Depending on its natural expression in these fivefold operations. The particular quality of consciousness of the soul reflecting in these five operations would be its form. Meaning, it could be different for each person. Even if it is similar in form, it will be distinct. So let's take another example instead of soul. The soul's qualities as they are expressed in the subtle worlds. Natural, most obvious form in which the soul's vibrational qualities are seen. In the physical world, we say flowers. Mother observes that the flowers are the expression of the psychic in nature. That's why it's so delicate, so subtle, and so short-lived often. Because physical nature cannot support for too long those subtlest of vibrations. But in the subtle world, the flower would last much longer, would be fresh, would be always there, and would be a natural expression of that particular soul quality. The form is an expression of the soul quality because there's no such thing as form, remember. It's only the pattern of its qualities, its gunas, its movements of force, which we see as form. And in the subtle world where movement of force is natural, normal, free, not bound as in matter, it's spontaneous. So now we will put it this way, and we'll end with this idea. In the subtle world, the flower form is its spontaneous expression of the quality of consciousness. In the physical world, that form gets represented in rigid substance of matter, but keeping the same quality, symbolism. And that's why you can take a flower, take mother's name that she has given, the spiritual quality that the flower represents, and you will see in its structure that quality represented. It's amazing to observe this. In its structure, in its form, in its properties, in its behavior, you will see that quality represented. There's a flower which is light without shadow, is it? Is it light without shadow? You can look at the flower, you can turn it in any direction, you will not see anywhere a shadow. It's amazing. Or there are other flowers, a flower which is called immortality. It does not dry up. You can leave it like that without water. It dries up, but its form, color does not change. It is permanent. Same color, same shape. Another flower which is plasticity, and its effect on the body has certain healing qualities of that character. It helps make the tissue plastic to heal. It removes scars. In any way you look at the structure of the flower, there's another which goes something like something in the collective consciousness. And you'll see bunches of little flowers which form collectivities there. Supramental sun, very specifically representing the nature of the supramental rays as they emerge from the center. All of these, I wish somebody who really understands botany deeply would sit down and make a list of what are those characteristics, including medical effects. There's one flower which she has named courage, which interestingly, independently in the Bach flower remedies system, is used to counter fear. And it's not like Mother has studied the Bach flower remedies system. She looked into the flower, found this as its particular quality, named it thus, and independently we find these correspondences. So there's a very interesting correlation. But it's not to say that the flower tries to represent in symbol a truth. In the subtle world, it is the spontaneous expression of those qualities which we see as form because of this particular way of perceiving through the 5 layers of the functions of conscious energy. In the physical world, they are only a concretization, and so here we say symbolic. But in the subtle world, they are the spontaneous expression in form of the quality of consciousness. So, Mother says in the supramental world, not everybody wears clothes. The form of your body, the clothing you wear, is a representation of the maturity of your consciousness. So a being who is not yet developed will be seen as a little child naked. As he grows in consciousness and in stature of consciousness, the body form represents spontaneously the character of the growth of consciousness and its maturity. You see the form as an adult. As the person develops richer powers and qualities of action and self-expression, it appears in the form of certain types of clothing, characteristic of the particular powers and capacities of expression that your consciousness has developed. So in the higher stations of consciousness, higher gradations, the form reveals the spiritual truths. In the material world, the form conceals. Although it is a representation from that to here, it conceals. I do not see courage in the flower. I see only its form. And therefore we say symbolic representation. But when matter one day becomes itself transformed and divinized, the same material with the density of the physical world of matter. So we will look at this relationship of the subtle and physical world in more detail. In the physical world, the solid principle is predominating. In the immediate next step in the vital world, the liquid principle predominates, although form exists. And the relationship is very interesting to observe. So we look at this and the further elaboration that Sri Aurobindo gives of how these 5 senses operate and in what way they are related to each other. And we continue this next time. You see, it's so fascinating. It takes us so deep into how consciousness perceives consciousness. That's happening right now in everything that we experience on all levels. And then within that, these finer distinctions and operations. And suddenly we realize what an extraordinary creation or manifestation that the divine has expressed. One self, indivisible, infinite potential, bursts out into this extraordinary magnificence of its self-expression, freely expressed. All through, from the highest to the most material, everywhere. There's brilliant variations of form, color, quality, nothing ever repeated. And it is the one self meeting itself and enjoying itself in all these infinite play of variations. We are a small part, looking through these little physical organs, seeing a little bit of it, and saying, oh, I am experiencing the world. But we experience 1,000th, 1,000,000th perhaps, of the totality of reality that self experiences as itself. And the day we awaken in our consciousness to self, we too can share in that totality of experience. That is the nature of the supramental experience of the world. So these are all fascinating perceptions, but all becomes obvious once we understand this and look at the universe through this perspective. It's so simple, it's so obvious. And Sri Aurobindo brings us to this perception where it's so simple and so obvious. We'll meditate on this for a while. As an exercise, I would suggest spend a little time before the ocean or in a garden before flowers in nature and try to imprint this idea in your perception as you're watching, as you're looking. Try to bring this idea of how these fivefold operations of conscious energy is creating this appearance, and behind it is the self, power of self flowing, filling, creating these forms so that it may enjoy itself through our eyes and of course directly through the bee's eyes, through the ant's eyes, through each, and of course directly in embracement of the consciousness meeting consciousness. And this is the beauty of this cosmos.